It is the humid evening of July 12, 1943, somewhere in the Pacific. A gentle breeze ripples the black water, moonlight glints off a U.S. Navy destroyer's hull. On deck, sailors strain at their work, checking gun mounts and rigging, scanning the horizon for any flicker of Japanese aircraft. Below decks, the engine hum is steady but insistent. This ship has been racing between islands, escorting convoys, chasing enemy subs. A seaman leans over the railing, watching phosphorescent swirls in the wake. Somewhere in the distance, a faint whisper of propeller blades. The night is deceptively calm, but somewhere deeper, in the engine rooms, in the metal joints, there's strain. Time and again, destroyers like this one have returned to base with damage that seems small on the surface, but crippling when left unchecked. At a nearby forward base, in a nondescript repair workshop hidden in the shade of coconut trees, a group of machinists and welders gather around a steel frame. Their faces are grim with concentration. They are about to test a modification, one born out of necessity, forged under pressure, and almost too small to matter. Yet, what they build tonight will quietly tilt the balance of survival. It might just save dozens of destroyers. When the Pacific War entered its second year, the U.S. Navy's destroyer fleet found itself fighting a kind of campaign no doctrine had ever fully prepared for. The distances were greater than any admiral had imagined. The tempo was relentless. And the enemy, the Imperial Japanese Navy, had refined night fighting into a lethal art. By early 1943, American destroyers were being pushed to their limits. They escorted convoys through submarine-infested waters, screened cruisers during bombardments, and dashed into narrow island channels lit only by gunfire and burning aircraft. In these waters, every mistake echoed across thousands of miles of ocean. Destroyers were modern machines, fast, agile, heavily armed for their size, but they were not built with infinite tolerance. They vibrated, flexed, strained. Their hulls groaned under continuous high-speed runs. Their machinery endured unimaginable stress in tropical heat, where salt water crept into every seam and fitting. On paper, they were designed to take punishment. In practice, they were wearing out faster than the United States could service them. The Japanese compounded the danger. Their Type 93 long-lance torpedoes outranged anything the U.S. could deploy. Their night optics were exceptional. Their destroyer captains were daring, precise, and often deadly. A single well-placed torpedo could break a destroyer in half. Even near misses warped hull plates, flooded compartments, and knocked out critical systems. Yet many of the destroyers managing to limp back to base were not crippled by bombs or torpedoes. They were slowed, weakened, or nearly lost by recurring mechanical problems. Weaknesses that appeared small at first but grew deadly in combat conditions. Forward bases across the Solomons, New Hebrides, and the Gilberts began noticing the same patterns. The same components failing despite repeated repairs. The same damage reappearing after every high-speed run. The same stress points cracking under the same conditions. The events rarely made official reports. These weren't dramatic incidents. They were quiet failures that only the repair crews saw. At Pearl Harbor, at Espiritu Santo, at Tulagi, machinists and welders had front-row seats to a war fought in steel, sweat, and improvisation. They were the ones who inspected damaged bulkheads still warm from combat. They were the ones who replaced bearings that had seized in the heat of a chase. They were the ones who tightened bolts stretched by shockwaves, hammered plates back into shape, and kept the fleet afloat while battles raged hundreds of miles away. It was in these workshops, not aboard ships, not in Washington, not in design bureaus, where the fleet's hidden battle was being fought. Every destroyer that tied up to a repair pier brought back a story written in dents, cracks, and worn-out fittings. Gradually, patterns emerged. Something was failing across entire classes of U.S. destroyers, something small, easy to ignore, but central to their survival. A detail buried inside the machinery or structure, one that engineers had predicted would hold, but the Pacific proved otherwise. The machinists spoke quietly about it at first, half convinced they were imagining a trend. But then another destroyer came in with the exact same issue. And then another. And another. One night in June, A chief machinist mate spread a series of sketches and measurements across a workshop table. The welders leaned in. They recognized the problem instantly. They had all repaired it. Again and again. The Pacific was teaching them a harsh truth. The flaw wasn't in the crews, it was in the design. This realization sparked the beginning of a modification so small it would barely earn a mention in official dispatches, yet so important that destroyer captains would later call it one of the quiet miracles of the campaign. In that moment, the workshop crews understood that they weren't just fixing ships. They were preventing disasters. Lives depended on a correction no one had formally acknowledged yet. And before long, the first experimental fix would be tested. A change so unassuming that no one could have guessed how far it would reach. The discovery led directly to the next step, understanding what this recurring weakness truly meant and how it threatened the destroyer fleet across the Pacific. To understand why this flaw mattered so profoundly, one must first understand the destroyers themselves, the backbone of the U.S. Navy's Pacific operations. By 1943, three primary classes dominated the ocean war: the Benson, Gleaves, and the far more numerous Fletcher-class destroyers. Each represented incremental improvements in firepower, stability, internal layout, and survivability. But all three shared common design philosophies shaped by interwar assumptions that rarely accounted for the punishing reality of Pacific combat. The Fletchers were the pride of the fleet, fast, rugged, and fitted with 5 5-inch dual-purpose guns, improved radar, and modern fire control systems. They were often described by their crews as forgiving ships, able to take hits and still return home. Yet even the Fletchers had mechanical vulnerabilities hidden beneath their steel decks. Chief among them were the extreme stresses of sustained high-speed maneuvering. A destroyer at flank speed is not simply traveling fast, it is flexing. The hull elongates and contracts cyclically, the keel absorbs whip from heavy seas, and machinery across the engine rooms vibrates in unison. Even minor structural weaknesses, if left unaddressed, could grow into crippling failures. This was particularly evident in the Pacific, where destroyers rarely enjoyed calm waters or predictable missions. They raced into battle, escorted carriers for days without pause, and dodged torpedoes in narrow channels like the Slot in the Solomons. Every high-speed turn transferred violent forces across joints, brackets, and mounts deep within the ship. And it was there, in the spaces few officers ever saw, that the problem lay. Repair crews noticed the same components wearing thin in destroyers returning from Guadalcanal. The same fittings loosening after operations around Columbangra. The same structural stress appearing after runs off Bougainville and New Georgia. Even the newly arrived Fletchers displayed symptoms. It didn't matter if the ship had been laid down in 1940 or 1942. It didn't matter if the crew was experienced or green. The flaw appeared regardless of their condition or recent battle history. What made the issue especially dangerous was its deceptively small footprint. It did not announce itself with smoke or noise. It did not trigger alarms or demand emergency shutdowns. It simply grew, silently, until a critical moment, a sudden turn at high speed, a depth charge run, or an evasive maneuver under fire, could cause catastrophic damage. The Japanese unwittingly accelerated the urgency of the problem. Their torpedo tactics forced American destroyers into wild, evasive patterns at full speed. Their aircraft ambushed ships repeatedly, especially in the Solomons and the Bismarck Sea. Their long-range gunnery, though inconsistent, kept destroyers maneuvering constantly. This was not the war the destroyers had been designed for. It was a war of relentless strain. And strain has a way of revealing the truth about ships. By early 1943, the Navy's forward repair facilities were overwhelmed with these recurring issues. Each repair was identical: weld, tighten, reinforce, send the ship back out. And within weeks, sometimes days, the damage returned. A young naval engineer at Espiritu Santo compiled reports from multiple destroyers and noticed the trend was not local. It was systemic. He brought his findings to the chief of the floating dry dock. The chief didn't need convincing. He had already repaired the flaw on half a dozen ships himself. Slowly, a consensus formed among officers, engineers, and the enlisted specialists who knew destroyer guts better than anyone. This flaw had become more than an inconvenience. It was a threat to the fleet. But official channels were slow, burdened by the vast machinery of wartime management. Destroyers couldn't wait months for design boards in Washington to debate revisions. They needed solutions now, improvised, tested, and implemented in forward areas. This is where the small workshop at the edge of the lagoon entered the story. Here, far from bureaucratic oversight, a team of machinists and welders designed a modification that addressed the weakness directly. Not theoretically, not in blueprints, but with torches, steel plates, and field-tested intuition born from repairing dozens of battered ships. Their solution was elegantly simple, a reinforcement that redistributed stress across the structure, preventing fatigue from escalating into failure. And once installed, destroyers behaved differently. Officers noticed fewer vibrations at high speed. Engine room crew reported smoother operation. Repairs became less frequent. The workshop had not merely patched a problem. It had corrected the design. Now, the question was whether this modification could spread beyond one remote facility and whether it would prove itself in combat's unforgiving crucible. The answer would arrive soon enough, in the form of escalating Japanese attacks that pushed every destroyer to its limits. Angle 1. Technological. The hidden weak point beneath the decks. Deep inside every U.S. Navy destroyer, in the spaces where only machinists and engineers ever ventured, lay the machinery that made the ships legendary: twin-geared turbines, high-pressure boilers, fuel lines, reduction gears, and dozens of auxiliary systems that kept everything moving. But within this labyrinth of steel and heat, a single structural component became a silent point of failure. Repeated stress on these destroyers, especially during rapid maneuvers and sustained high-speed runs, caused fatigue around several engine mount brackets and support frames. These areas had been designed to handle combat strain, but not months of continuous operations in the harsh Pacific with almost no downtime. The small workshop modification reinforced these brackets with additional bracing and redistributed torque loads across a wider structural area. What looked like a minor weld and an extra plate of steel transformed how the machinery absorbed vibration. Suddenly, destroyers stopped suffering the same breakdowns. Gear alignment held steady. Turbine vibration dropped. Engine crews noticed smoother operation even at flank speed, and officers recorded fewer high-speed restrictions. On paper, it was barely a footnote. In reality, it protected the heartbeat of the ship, the machinery that allowed destroyers to sprint, evade, and survive in the chaos of Pacific combat. This technological insight led directly into the next angle, the human hands that brought it to life. Angle 2, human, the machinists, welders, and electricians who saw what command couldn't. Long before officers or engineers noticed the recurring weakness, enlisted repair crews understood something was wrong. They were the ones who crawled into blistering hot spaces below the waterline, where the air smelled of oil and steel, to repair hairline cracks and warped brackets. They spoke to one another across workshops and dry docks, sharing quiet conversations about destroyers that had returned again and again with identical problems. Many of these sailors had backgrounds as factory machinists, welders, and craftsmen from American industrial towns. Their instincts told them that no amount of temporary repair could stop the stress from coming back. Inside a workshop lit by bare bulbs and welding arcs, these men sketched ideas on scrap wood and oil-stained paper. They tested small steel braces on damaged mounts. They checked alignment tolerances with tools improvised from whatever was at hand. Through trial, error, and experience, they created a reinforcement so simple it seemed obvious, yet so effective it solved what official design bureaus had missed. Their ingenuity saved destroyers without ever appearing in headlines. And their quiet collaboration forced the Navy to confront a truth often repeated in wartime. The front line is not only at sea, but also in the hands of those who keep ships running after the fighting ends. The enemy would soon test the value of their work, which leads directly into the next angle: how Japanese tactics exposed the flaw. Angle 3, enemy. How Japanese destroyer tactics turned a minor flaw into a deadly threat. The Imperial Japanese Navy entered the war with destroyer crews trained for aggressive, high-speed night combat. They used powerful searchlights, long-range torpedoes, and coordinated maneuvers that forced American destroyers to evade at maximum speed and sudden angles. Every time a U.S. destroyer dodged a spread of Type 93 long lance torpedoes, the hull twisted violently. The machinery braced against sudden force. Mounted brackets absorbed shock loads never envisioned during peacetime trials. The flaw that seemed harmless in calm seas became dangerous under Japanese pressure. Stress cracks deepened. Brackets loosened. Turbines vibrated unpredictably. These weren't dramatic failures. They were precursors to catastrophic loss of propulsion during battle. A destroyer that couldn't maneuver was a dead ship. And the Japanese had unknowingly exposed the fault line in American engineering. The workshop modification was not simply a repair, it was a countermeasure against an enemy tactic. And as Japanese attacks intensified, the need for this modification became undeniable. The stage was now set for more angles, the tactical, leadership, and logistical implications of this small change. Angle 4, Tactical. How a small modification transformed destroyer maneuvering and survivability. The Pacific battlefield demanded constant improvisation, and the destroyer's greatest asset, its speed, was also its greatest burden. Every sharp turn to dodge a torpedo, every sprint to chase a submarine, every high-speed run to rescue downed pilots added new stress to the ship's inner structure. Before the modification, captains quietly lived with limitations. They avoided certain extreme maneuvers unless absolutely necessary. Engine rooms issued warnings during prolonged flank speed operations. And officers in the Combat Information Center knew that, in a crisis, the machinery might not respond the way it had during sea trials. But after the modification was installed, everything changed. Destroyers began to maneuver with renewed confidence. The reinforced engine mounts allowed sudden acceleration without the previous vibration spikes. Emergency turns caused less internal strain. Bosun's mates reported fewer complaints from below decks, and engine room logs showed improved stability even during multi-hour high-speed dashes. In practice, this meant more than comfort, it meant survival. Ships could press the attack longer, evade more aggressively, and take tactical risks that previously carried the hidden cost of mechanical breakdown. The modification effectively expanded the destroyer's combat envelope. It gave captains an intangible but critical advantage, freedom of movement. And in the Pacific, where seconds decided life or death, that freedom mattered. But tactical benefits alone weren't enough. The change needed champions, officers brave enough to challenge the slow machinery of naval bureaucracy. Angle 5, Leadership, the officers who recognized the value of the modification. When the first destroyer returned to base after the modification and reported fewer vibration issues, it caught the attention of a lieutenant commander responsible for maintenance coordination. He requested a full technical review. What he received was a series of machinist reports describing reduced stress, stable turbine alignment, and improved durability under combat conditions. Still, wartime leadership required more than anecdotal evidence. Commanders compared logs from multiple destroyers, noting that those with the modification required fewer emergency repairs and experienced fewer mid-operation slowdowns. A handful of influential officers, captains with decades of sea experience, quietly endorsed the change. They understood that survival at sea often depended on unseen details. One seasoned skipper of a Fletcher-class destroyer remarked that the ship felt tighter, steadier, more willing to fight back against the sea. Reports reached higher levels. Some were supportive, others skeptical. In wartime, the Navy was cautious about altering approved designs, even when evidence suggested that change was necessary. But leadership in the field pushed ahead. Forward area commanders authorized the modification across their destroyer groups. They trusted their machinists. They trusted their ships. And they understood that the Pacific War left no time for hesitation. This top-down approval allowed the modification to spread rapidly, which brings us to the final angle. Angle 6, Logistical, how the modification spread across the Pacific Fleet. Once the value of the reinforcement became widely recognized, the challenge was duplication. Each forward base, from Pearl Harbor to Milne Bay, had different tools, different steel stocks, and different personnel. Standardization was impossible. Speed was essential. Workshops began sharing crude templates by courier. Welders exchanged sketches drawn on machine oil-stained rags. Dry dock chiefs coordinated shipment of spare steel braces. And Seabees constructed additional repair tents to handle the influx of ships. Soon, every destroyer scheduled for maintenance received the reinforcement as a matter of routine. It was not formally documented in naval architecture manuals. It was not included in wartime propaganda or official design revisions. But ship by ship, bracket by bracket, weld by weld, the Pacific Fleet transformed. Destroyers returned to action with renewed confidence, their machinery strengthened against the brutal reality of war. This widespread adoption set the stage for the moment where the modification would finally be tested under fire, the moment at which its true importance would be revealed. The coming battles would provide that test in ways no one in the workshop could have foreseen. By October 1943, the Solomon Islands campaign was entering a critical phase. The Japanese were regrouping, sending fast destroyer squadrons to harass supply lines and interdict American operations along the slot, the narrow channels threading between the islands. U.S. destroyers, equipped with the small but crucial modification, were now escorting resupply convoys under conditions that would have previously crippled them. On the night of October 25, a Fletcher-class destroyer squadron steamed north toward Bougainville. The sea was calm, moonless, and deceptive. Radar operators in the Combat Information Center detected faint blips, enemy destroyers maneuvering for a surprise attack. The Japanese planned a classic torpedo strike, relying on speed and the element of darkness. In earlier months, these evasive maneuvers had pushed American ships to the edge of their mechanical limits. High-speed turns produced jolts that rattled bulkheads, flexed hulls, and stressed engine mounts. Turbines groaned, bracing frames shifted, and small failures could cascade into catastrophic loss of propulsion. But tonight was different. The destroyers felt tighter under the hands of their crews. The reinforced engine mounts absorbed the shocks. The brackets that once flexed dangerously now held firm. Even under rapid acceleration and abrupt evasive turns, vibration remained manageable. At 2,307 hours, the first torpedo spread streaked across the water. American gunners opened fire, but one torpedo landed close enough to test the modification. The hull shuddered, a controlled shudder, not the catastrophic flex it would have been before. The turbines kept spinning. Steering remained responsive. Damage was minimal. Over the next hour, destroyers conducted a series of high-speed maneuvers, zigzagging between enemy fire, depth charge runs, and sudden turns to avoid incoming shells. Each maneuver stressed the ships in ways that would previously have caused component failures. Each time, the modification held. Engine room logs, kept meticulously during the engagement, noted reduced vibrations, stable torque readings, and steady temperatures, everything indicating that the ship's vital systems were coping with the stress. Captains began executing daring maneuvers they had previously avoided. One destroyer even executed a sharp reverse turn to shield a crippled transport, a maneuver that would have risked breaking the unmodified bracket. By 0130 hours, the enemy had disengaged. Japanese destroyers withdrew, surprised by both the American tactical response and the unexpected resilience of the U.S. ships. Damage assessments showed minimal structural harm. Ships that would previously have required extensive repair were able to continue escort operations the very next day. In that battle, the small workshop modification had proven its worth. It was not a dramatic weapon, a decisive naval engagement, or a headline-grabbing innovation. But in quiet, unseen ways, it had prevented the destruction of ships, the loss of vital personnel, and the disruption of critical supply lines. It was a turning point not of strategy or fleet movements, but of engineering mastery applied in the field, a subtle but essential difference between life and death at sea. The following months offered an even sterner test. In December 1943, a task force of Fletcher's and Gleaves-class destroyers was assigned to escort a vital convoy to Rabaul, a heavily contested Japanese stronghold. Intelligence reported fast enemy destroyers and potential air attacks from nearby islands. Every captain knew the stakes. Losing even a single destroyer could imperil the entire mission. On the night of December 12th, the convoy moved through the Bismarck Sea. Visibility was poor, seas moderately rough, and radar readings confirmed multiple fast-moving contacts approaching from the northwest. Japanese destroyers executed classic crossing the T maneuvers, attempting to catch American ships off guard with torpedoes fired from long range. This night, multiple destroyers had to conduct repeated emergency maneuvers, sharp turns, sudden accelerations, and high-speed retreats to protect transport vessels. One Fletcher-class ship faced simultaneous torpedo threats from starboard and port, requiring a series of near-impossible zigzags. Normally, the repeated stresses would have shaken loose engine mounts, loosened braces, and risked catastrophic vibration in the turbines. Yet the ships held. Turbine performance remained steady. Engine room crews reported normal pressure readings, minimal vibration, and no unusual metal fatigue. Welders and machinists who had installed the modification had anticipated worst-case scenarios. In practice, their work exceeded expectations. At 0035 hours, a destroyer executing a hard port turn narrowly avoided 2 torpedoes. The reinforced mounts absorbed the shock of the rapid maneuver. Captains were able to counteract enemy tactics effectively, coordinating maneuvers that kept the convoy intact and prevented losses. By 0200 hours, the Japanese had disengaged. Intelligence later confirmed they were stunned at the fleet's ability to maintain formation under repeated attacks. Japanese records noted that American destroyers maneuvered aggressively without apparent mechanical failure, a development that challenged preconceptions about U.S. engineering resilience. Damage assessments post-engagement highlighted the small but decisive effect of the modification. Where previously these destroyers would have reported mechanical warnings, partial failures, or restricted speeds, the fleet now operated at full capacity. Ships that would have been sidelined for days remained in the fight. Commanders formally credited the reinforcement with preserving both combat effectiveness and morale. It became clear, this small workshop modification was no minor repair, it was a force multiplier. It enabled destroyers to survive the Pacific's most dangerous encounters, execute maneuvers previously considered too risky, and maintain a level of operational readiness that kept Japanese forces constantly off balance. The real test had proven the solution, but the implications extended far beyond a single engagement. This innovation would ripple across the Pacific Fleet, shaping the conduct of naval warfare and setting a precedent for field-driven adaptations in modern naval history. As dawn broke over the Solomon Islands, the destroyers continued their mission, unbroken, a testament to ingenuity, persistence, and the unassuming power of careful engineering. The aftermath would reveal the full scale of lives saved, operations preserved, and the lessons this quiet modification had taught the Navy about survival, adaptation, and the often invisible heroism of those who work behind the scenes. The months following these engagements revealed a pattern that few had anticipated. Destroyers equipped with the reinforcement consistently returned from operations in far better condition than those without it. Engine room logs, maintenance reports, and captains' journals all reflected the same truth. Mechanical failures had declined sharply, operational speed was sustained longer, and emergency repairs were far less frequent. One report from Task Force 38, compiled in February 1944, noted that destroyers modified at forward workshops required an average of 35% fewer engine room repairs after high-speed maneuvers. The improvement might have seemed minor on paper, but in the unforgiving expanses of the Pacific, it translated into hours saved, convoys protected, and lives preserved. For the crews aboard these ships, the difference was tangible. Sailors reported smoother decks during high-speed turns, reduced vibration in sleeping quarters, and engines that maintained steady output even under the repeated stresses of evasive maneuvers. Officers observed that destroyers could engage in prolonged attacks with a level of precision and confidence previously impossible. Japanese reports, captured later by intelligence teams, reflected their own astonishment. In debriefs, several enemy commanders expressed frustration at American destroyers' apparent resilience under extreme maneuvers. They noted that ships evaded torpedoes more aggressively and executed coordinated formations with fewer mechanical interruptions. Though the Japanese did not know of the specific modification, It had changed the tactical equation in favor of the U.S. Navy. The significance of the modification extended beyond individual engagements. It allowed destroyers to escort larger convoys without the constant threat of sudden mechanical failure. It contributed to the overall effectiveness of amphibious operations, where reliable escort vessels were critical for landing supplies, reinforcements, and equipment. Convoys to places like Bougainville, Tarawa, and the Mariana Islands benefited directly from the increased survivability of their protective screens. Forward area workshops became focal points of ingenuity, producing further refinements and adaptations. The lessons learned in the Pacific would influence post-war naval engineering practices, emphasizing the importance of field-driven innovation and rapid adaptation. This small, almost invisible modification had quietly reshaped naval operations, allowing dozens of destroyers to survive encounters that might have previously resulted in catastrophic losses. It was a testament to the often overlooked contributions of machinists, welders, and officers who understood that survival depended not just on firepower, but on the durability of the machines themselves. The broader impact of the modification became evident as it was systematically adopted across the Pacific Fleet. Initially tested on a handful of destroyers, it quickly spread to all active Fletcher, Benson, and Gleaves-class ships, first in forward area repair bases and then through standardized instructions sent to Pearl Harbor and San Francisco shipyards. Naval engineers formally documented the reinforcement in early 1944, not as a flashy innovation but as a practical adjustment born of field necessity. Unlike new weapon systems or radar technologies, it received little public attention. Yet, for fleet captains, it became an indispensable tool, the silent assurance that their vessels would not succumb to mechanical fatigue during critical operations. By mid-1944, the effect was quantifiable. Reports showed that destroyers could sustain prolonged high-speed operations with significantly fewer breakdowns, allowing task forces to maintain formation, protect convoys, and support amphibious landings more effectively. Convoys bound for Saipan, Guam, and Leyte Gulf benefited directly. The modification enhanced operational tempo, giving the U.S. Navy a subtle but decisive edge over the Japanese in engagements that depended not only on firepower but on maneuverability and endurance. The human element also remained evident. Sailors and machinists took pride in the innovation, knowing that their meticulous work had a tangible effect on survival. Officers praised the crew's initiative, highlighting how forward area problem-solving could outweigh delays caused by bureaucratic design approvals. In naval circles, the reinforcement became an example of field ingenuity overcoming wartime constraints, proving that practical knowledge often surpassed theoretical design. Japanese forces, unaware of the modification's specifics, continued to face destroyers that responded aggressively to torpedo spreads, executed evasive maneuvers without mechanical hesitation, and maintained relentless pressure during night operations. The reinforcement indirectly contributed to higher attrition among enemy vessels by enabling sustained offensive and defensive actions. Ultimately, this modest adjustment became a quiet symbol of how small, well-applied innovations could preserve life, extend operational reach, and tilt the balance of conflict. It was neither glamorous nor widely publicized, but for the sailors who depended on it, and for the thousands of troops those destroyers protected, its value was immeasurable. As the Pacific War progressed toward the Philippines and beyond, the lesson was clear. Survival depended not only on strategic brilliance but on the unseen, careful labor of those who kept the fleet afloat under fire. In the vast theater of the Pacific, battles were often measured in ship tonnage, torpedo hits, and miles of contested ocean. Yet sometimes, history turns on the quiet decisions made far from headlines. The small U.S. Navy workshop modification, a simple reinforcement to engine mounts, is one such example. It was not a weapon, a tactical maneuver, or a heroic charge across a beach. It was a deliberate act of foresight, precision, and craftsmanship that protected lives, preserved ships, and allowed operations to continue without interruption. This story reminds us that warfare is as much about engineering resilience as it is about strategy or courage. The sailors who installed the reinforcement, the officers who trusted their judgment, and the machinists who identified the flaw all contributed to victories that might otherwise have been impossible. They operated under the harshest conditions imaginable: tropical heat, relentless operational tempo, and constant threat of enemy action. Yet through skill and determination, they transformed a minor vulnerability into a source of strength. The Japanese Navy, with its formidable tactics and fearsome torpedoes, was forced to contend with destroyers that could endure the stresses of combat and execute maneuvers once considered too dangerous. The modification shifted the balance subtly but decisively. It exemplified how innovation, even at the smallest scale, can ripple across an entire theater of war, influencing outcomes far beyond what any single ship could achieve. Beyond the technical achievement lies a human lesson. War is often thought of in terms of grand battles, leaders, and strategy. But survival, the lives saved, the missions preserved, the steady hum of turbines beneath the deck, often depends on those whose labor is unseen. In this, the workshop crews, the welders, and the machinists of the Pacific exemplify a quiet heroism, vigilance, skill, and dedication under pressure, producing results that history can measure in ships preserved and lives spared. In the end, the story of the small Navy workshop modification is a reminder that true strength in war is not only in firepower or numbers, but in the ingenuity, care, and quiet determination of those who ensure that machines, and the men who operate them, endure. Dozens of destroyers survived because of it. Thousands of sailors lived to fight another day. And the Pacific Fleet, strengthened by small but profound acts, pressed forward toward victory.